Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Fellowshow. My name is Kyle. You can follow me on Twitter at theFellowKGB. And today I'm super excited. We got a special episode for you guys. We have Sigmund Bloom from Footballguys on the podcast. We're going to be talking about 2021 projections, and it's his first year doing them. So I'm just kind of interested in his process and seeing what he's got to teach us. So he's the co-owner of Footballguys. If you guys don't know him from there, check him out on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. I don't know. With all that said, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Great. We're just sipping our coffee talk on a Friday morning. I like the chill vibes coming in, and it's good. The season is still far enough away that we can take big picture views of things. That's what projections are all about. We can take stances on offenses. I like to say right now, think about drafting offenses as much as you're drafting players.
Mhm.
And that's where projections really give you a more clear view, and really just any number of inroads, on-ramps to engage with the puzzles that we try to solve, but we keep coming back to try to solve them because we know we can't actually do it.
And we're looking at like the full picture here. We're kind of looking at like the whole forest, and now we're kind of like, now that we had OTAs and mini camps, and now we have time to sit and think, which sometimes could be the worst thing because now we have to stew on everything that we just witnessed the last couple of weeks, and now we're just getting ready for July. But I like looking at the offenses as a whole. And one of my projection tabs, I compile all the offenses, and then I can see which offense is going to have the most PPR points. I'm seeing who's going to have the most yards. That's kind of how I look at it. And then the other thing, too, is I look at how many plays a offense wants to run per game. I look at the last couple of years and try to figure it out. Some things do make sense. Some things are predictable from year to year. But I'm just curious, like, how does one begin to make even projections? Like, where did you start off this season?
Well, I'm lucky because we have such a great support team at Footballguys that in my first year doing this, they create for us what we would call guardrails, right? And it gives you an idea of the last 5 years on average for teams, and you can see each individual year in different cumulative categories, and then even across the whole league, right? How many passing touchdowns were there across the whole league? What was the interception rate across the whole league? So I'm lucky that I don't have to compile all of that myself, so that what I'm projecting is generally within the range of possibilities. Now, that being said, you know what I'm going to say here, right?
Mhm.
That sometimes things happen outside of the range of what has happened before. And in fact, those are the most important situations to at least be open to. You don't necessarily have to draft as if those things are going to happen, but you should be open to it. And doing the exercise of projections allows you to sometimes take a stand. Because one of the things that you look at, you know, take any offense that has had a change, whether it's a new head coach and offensive coordinator, a new quarterback, maybe a team like the Raiders who they don't have a lot in common with their offensive line last year. So the one thing that is probably the wrong answer is to say it's going to be the same as last year. I mean, there are teams like Buffalo. Buffalo, with the exception of swapping out John Brown for Emmanuel Sanders, basically the same offense. So it's almost like you have to make an argument to tell me why it's going to be different if you project it to be different.
Mhm.
But then there are other offenses that if you project it to be similar to last year, you're obviously going to be wrong, right? I mean, if we look at the Atlanta offense, it's Arthur Smith, it's Kyle Pitts, it's Mike Davis. It's going to be different. So I think that these are the things where it's numbers, it's very seemingly mathematical and analytical, but it's still based on narrative street. It's still based on your ideas as a starting consideration of how this year is going to look different than last year.
And then the hard part too is just assessing all the additions and everything that they did in their offseason, kind of compiling all that, and then
Mm-hmm.
the sum of parts. Okay, who did they add at coach? Who did they add at just offensive coordinator? That you have to factor all those things. So for me, I find myself looking back at a guy like the Chargers offense with Joe Lombardi. Like, how is that going to look this year? Like, they looked pretty good last year with Shane Steichen, and now they're going to kind of do something different. Like, I'm nervous about projecting teams where we don't really know too much about what their new offense is going to look like. But a team like the Chargers, I think I had kind of fun with that, projecting that one. But I'm also nervous because they led the league in plays, per game last season on offense. So it's kind of looking at, for me, it's looking at how many plays a team wants to run. Who did they change? Are they better? A team like the Chiefs getting better at the offensive line.
Right.
Excited about Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and losing Sammy Watkins, I think it's gonna make this team change their identity. running maybe the more 2 tight end sets. I was watching you guys last night talking about Noah Gray, which got me excited. Maybe more about the run game and just Clyde Edwards being, I mean, after Tyreek and Kelsey, like what are they going to do? It's probably going to be Clyde Edwards as being the next guy that really steps up and does more in that offense. So I'm trying to think of another. Let's see. So what did you do with like the 17 game season? Like how much does that alter what we should think of? To me, it didn't really do that much. For like I kind of just projected as, okay, this player is going to play 15 and a half to 16 games. I kind of just left it kind of what it is and maybe just added a half game more for the most part. But I found myself projecting backup quarterbacks, maybe half a game more, maybe one full more game. How did you wrestle with that?
Well, first, again, I'm going to give credit to, I'll just mention Austin Lee. Austin Lee's fantastic. And he's one of the ones who's making sure that we have this guidance, the guardrails on our projections. And again, it made it really easy to mathematically take what the baseline was for a 16 game season and just say for a 17 game season, this is what it should look like. And I suppose when you're looking at someone's projections, if they're projecting cumulative totals the same as last year, then you know that that's just one step of being very rigorous that they haven't taken, right? It's just you're and maybe it's a sign that there are other steps to be rigorous. And like I said, I'm not taking credit for this because it's because of the support structure at Footballguys. So I think that's a starting point, right? I mean, 1,000-yard season doesn't mean the same as it meant last year. And now there's other questions. I mean, you can say there'll be more injuries. You can say that teams will load manage running backs, kind of like what they've done in the NBA, or otherwise be erring on the side of letting a player sit instead of making them play, knowing that we've got even a longer haul going on. And in the NBA this year, because of how compressed the schedule was, there's been a lot more injuries in the playoffs, right? So, I think the good organizations are looking at this, and they already have lots of data about this. So I don't yet, and the thing is, this is my first year doing this. So I may find that something I chose was ill-advised. I'm not getting in the business of projecting injuries. Mm-hmm. I'm not getting in the business of saying the one place where I'm splitting games is situations like San Francisco, Chicago, maybe New England, where we expect there will be a quarterback change at some point in the season, or at least have to be open to it. And then you have to take a stand. How many games will Andy Dalton start? How many games will Justin Fields start? Because it matters. Mm-hmm. The offense, Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo, Mac Jones and Cam Newton, the offenses look completely different with those quarterbacks. Go ahead.
And when I'm doing that, like that's the hardest part, is figuring out these rookie quarterback situations, because there's a handful this year, and you almost have to look at it as in a points per game basis. And this is almost going to kind of lead me to my next question, because I want to talk about like what kind of league is your favorite league to play in. Dynasty leagues are some of the most fun leagues to do, but for redraft leagues this year, I think that's what most people that watch my show end up playing. So for these redraft leagues, and I play a lot of superflex leagues. So these 2 quarterback leagues where you can end up maybe snagging Justin Fields as your QB3 and just holding pat, until mid-season, or even Trey Lance, because I have a feeling once the pads come on, Trey Lance is going to be we're going to be hearing a lot of good things about him. So I'm curious about like looking at the points per game when I project a rookie for 4 or 5 games. I'm looking at that points per game, and then I'm kind of just stashing that in the back of my drafts and looking, hey, if anything happens here, you have a guy that could potentially really, like, kind of like how Jalen Hurts took off at the end of last year. If you get that, with Trey Lance or anything like that, that's gonna push you to the finish line. So I'm just curious, like, talk a little bit more about the rookie quarterback situations.
Yeah. Well, I think the first and foremost, you're looking at the information coming out of the organizations, right? So it appears San Francisco is going to, I think it was Matt Mayoko, and Matt Mayoko's, know your beat writers, know who's new, know who's been around for a while. Matt Mayoko's been covering the 49ers for a long time. He is also not a beat writer who is prone to injecting his own opinion or analysis into things. And from his reports, it appears they're going to give Trey Lance a chance to win this job. Now, Chicago is a little bit tougher, because it seems like Matt Nagy is more conservative and basically is going to give Andy Dalton the week 1 job. Now, a few practices in training camp could change that. And that's what we're testing, right? Again, this gets back to psychoanalyzing these coaches, right? What if in the first few practices it becomes apparent to everybody that Justin Fields is just going to have more juice, just give the offense more juice. And what we're going to be watching there are first team reps, because a quarterback cannot win the job without first team reps. Now, that being said, Deshaun Watson did not get a first team rep the year that it took less than a game of Tom Savage, and they said, "Whoops, we're going to start the rookie." So it can flip really fast. We underestimate how quickly things flip. It's very mercurial. It's like an inflection point where things just turn 180 in one moment. And then you have New England, and the interesting thing about New England is at first you heard Mac Jones is far away, and that's not a statement on Mac Jones. That's just a statement on Josh McDaniels' offense. But then as they were practicing in OTAs, you heard more, Cam Newton looks a little rough out there. You can just feel from a passing rhythm and accuracy standpoint that Mac Jones is showing signs of being ready. And this could be one that, again, in training camp, maybe they open up training camp saying it's Cam and we're going to bring Mac Jones along. But if that trend continues, that one could flip. We don't really have any kind of track record with Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels to know how willing they are to do that, though. So that's a little more difficult to project. But it's all that downstream stuff, right, Kyle? Because, like, if it's Andy Dalton, I want Allen Robinson. Go back and look what Andy Dalton did with A.J. Green. Andy Dalton is a very simple, straightforward quarterback, and he's going to feed his guy that, hey, you can throw it in his vicinity. Even when he's not open, he's open. If it's Justin Fields, now I'm interested in Darnell Mooney. The deep ball chemistry between those two could be just something beautiful. Trey Lance, I think that Trey Lance would be good for the running game. Not that the running game needs a lot of help. I think it probably would be not good for the passing game. I think you see the passing volume drop. Maybe passing efficiency would go up. And that's one of the other things that getting into projections does for you, right? Because you start to weigh these different things. There's volume, and then there's efficiency. You can have a drop in volume, but if it has a corresponding rise in efficiency that's greater, then it can still be good for the offense as a whole. It can still grow that pie. So the slices in the pie get bigger. This is the fallacy of the too many mouths to feed argument, right? Because if the efficiency of the offense is higher, then even if the volume is lower, like Cleveland, it's exciting to hear Austin Hooper talk about. We weren't even really able to do, again, keep this in mind with everything we're talking about. There was no offseason last year. There was no chance to do offseason installs. Even training camp was weird. It wasn't a typical training camp. These teams are getting a chance to do things the way that they want. So we're always weighing those things. As far as Mac Jones and Cam Newton goes, I would say that the big thing here is if Cam Newton's not the quarterback, what does that mean for Damian Harris's touchdown totals? All of a sudden, Damian Harris goes from being, what is he right now, Kyle, like a 7th, 8th round pick?
Yeah.
If you told me that Cam Newton wasn't going to start this year, or Cam Newton was going to start and be replaced a game or two in, I'm taking Damian Harris like in the 5th round.
Well, one thing that I started wrestling with is what if they allow Mac Jones to be the quarterback kind of in between the 20s?
Right.
It even kind of comes in as and they run this kind of 2 quarterback thing near the red zone just to mess with defenses. So I don't know. I'm kind of splitting Mac Jones and Cam Newton 50-50, but these are the hard teams to project, these rookie quarterbacks. And then what else have you struggled with trying to figure out? For me, I hated projecting Houston Texans. They were the last team. I just kept pushing them back. But were there any teams that were you just like really struggled with trying to figure out how to look this season?
Yeah, Houston's a good one to bring up just because, again, how many games is Deshaun Watson going to play? Is it going to be 6, 8, 0, 17? I mean, and while we're on that topic, Kyle, we just got to mention Green Bay too. Another really tough team to project right now because you have to take a stand. I mean, that's the whole thing about projections or rankings, and projections are much tougher than rankings. And projections, can I make a little rant speech here?
I was going to throw in a question to you because I was going to say projections don't necessarily equal rankings. And
no.
Yeah, I think I'll let you go with what you're going to say then.
Well, yeah, we can cut to the chase here. Projections are, you're kind of projecting a median or mean expectation, but the range of expectations, 2 players can have the same median or mean expectation and have completely different ceilings and floors. And I think in fantasy football, ceiling is what you should be mostly concerned about. And the one data point of a projection doesn't reflect that. Eventually, the technology will be there. It's already there, but I'm stuck in the stone ages of being able to do a projection that is more like a probability cloud and say, there's a 30% chance they'll fall in this narrow range in the middle, but then there's a 20% chance they'll fall in this range a little bit lower, a 10% chance they'll be a little bit higher, a 5% chance, and so on. And you can even elucidate it, Kyle, and say, whatever. If Mac Jones is the quarterback, now Jacoby Myers goes into the higher range of his range of outcomes. So does Damian Harris. If Cam Newton's the quarterback, now Damian Harris is in the lower range of his outcomes for touchdowns, but maybe his efficiency gets into a higher range of outcomes. Or maybe, you project there to be fewer plays with Trey Lance than with Jimmy Garoppolo, or however you want to. And by the way, can I mention this?
Mm-hmm.
Defense matters.
Mm-hmm.
If you're projecting pace, if you're projecting number of plays, if you're projecting run heavy versus pass heavy, what kind of game scripts these teams are going to be in, you have to have a grasp of their defense. Minnesota's a really interesting one because their defense is going to be improved. We talked about this with Charts on the Couch this week. Their defense is going to be improved. How greatly, we'll see. But if their defense gets back into the top half of the league, then that has implications for the offense. Now, it might be lower volume, higher efficiency, more touchdown opportunities, shorter fields, but fewer plays around lower volume. The point is you're wrestling with all these things. So projections are just giving you one data point, whereas rankings reflect the full range of possibilities, or at least they should. So they're not interchangeable. They should never be interchangeable. But the exercise of doing it is what gets you in touch with what the key forks in the road are of making decisions of who you're going to target, what you like. So you mentioned, going all the way back to the beginning here of the question, difficult offenses to project. Mm-hmm. And to me, the name that immediately comes out of the ether is Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. And I've talked about this a couple of times on my show. Urban Meyer is a really tough dude to pin down, in so much that it seems like he is probably going to just do what he did with his college gigs, right? It sure seems like it. So we can start there. And then you have this idea of, is he going to be irrational in the sense that he's going to force Travis Etienne into this H-back role, or maybe he's going to force him into this Percy Harvin, Curtis Samuel H-back role and make him the lead back because he wants to show how smart he was to spend a first-round pick on him. But then you hear that really he wanted Kadarius Toney, so he's really obsessed with this H-back role. Well, maybe Laviska Shenault is actually the best player on the roster for that. Well, he realized that. He sure seems smitten with Shenault right now. He doesn't seem like he's on the DJ Chark train, or at least he wants DJ Chark to show him something that he didn't show him last year. So that makes us see Chark in a more negative light. Then there's Marvin Jones. Daryl Bevell knows Marvin Jones, right? So how much say is Bevell going to have in this offense? Because if it's a Bevell offense, Marvin Jones is kind of like the wide receiver coach / maybe number one receiver. If it's an Urban Meyer offense, who knows? We're going to see Tim Tebow at the goal line, right? I mean, again, if you're psychoanalyzing Urban Meyer and he's just going to do what he did before, well, he even brought Tebow in. The fact that he brought Tebow in at all is a sign that we should at least be open to him doing things that we would say that doesn't make any sense. But to him, it makes sense because he's reliving the old glory days, right? James Robinson, rational coaching is James Robinson gets 250 carries. I mean, really, actually, rational coaching at this point might be try ETN in that H-back role. You hear my brain, you hear like circuits like crackling and popping and fizzing out, like smoke's gonna come out of my ears. Because if he's obsessed with the H-back role, he already had Laviska Shenault. And if he wants to ground and pound like he did with the running game, he already had James Robinson. And yet they still spent a first-round pick on Travis Etienne. And we generally think coaches are going to go against the grain, even if the game and the players are telling them, do this, to show how smart they are, to show just how wise they are with the picks they made. And they force these players on the field and they force square pegs into round holes. So I'm really flummoxed when it's time to project the Jags offense.
It's difficult with a college coach coming in and already kind of he's kind of like making people like already look at this, like what's going on here. Like it's confusing from the start. So it almost makes me wonder if I want anything to do with the Jacksonville offense.
Right.
I'm always going to root for Laviska. I think that's the one guy that I think could be their best player on their team this season. So like when I don't really know what to do with the team, I ask myself, who's the one player that I think I could use the most out of this situation? So that's kind of how I go for drafting it. But as far as projecting the Jaguars, everything's kind of there's almost too many possibilities because we just don't know. So I'm kind of just doing 50-50 everything.
Yeah.
James Robinson, I probably have maybe like a 60-40 with the carries, but ETN's going to be on the field catching a lot of balls. And then really, I think you can make a case for any receiver, Chark, Chenault, or Jones. Each one could be leading the team in touchdowns.
Yep.
I think Chenault's probably the guy leading the team in receptions. And then you got Chark probably leading them in yards. It's kind of like a wheel of, or maybe it's a dartboard. We're just kind of whipping it at the Jaguars. So I agree. One of the more difficult teams to project. And I guess what's on the opposite end of the spectrum? What was one of your favorite or like the easiest teams to project? For me, I really enjoyed projecting Dallas and Cincinnati.
Yeah, Cincinnati's fun. Cincinnati's fun because you are going to project things that people will say, whoa, whoa, whoa. But if their numbers actually support it. And I've cited this stat a lot. Joe Burrow threw to wide receivers 28.4 times a game last year. So absolutely this offense can support 3 wide receivers that we plug into our lineups every week in typical fantasy leagues. It should, in fact. It would be surprising if it didn't. And the other thing that's exciting about that is the offensive line is improved, and maybe, just maybe, Zach Taylor hasn't had a chance to run the offense that he was hired to run whenever the year that everybody was like 6 degrees with Sean McVay with head coaching hires. So these things are all exciting. In the chat room, Daz 98 asked about how do you go about estimating the ceiling for an offense and brought up the 2020 Bills. So if you're looking for offenses with growth potential, Cincinnati is a good one because of all of these things that are converging. And I have a separate sheet, Kyle, that I have in the plus and minus changes in offenses and defenses. It's very objective and factual. Now, the analysis layer is how important are these changes going to be? Are they even going to matter? Or could they even be negative changes when everything gets rolling? But Cincinnati is a team that has a lot of positive growth potential. Washington is a team with a lot of positive growth potential. The Rams are a team with positive growth potential because not only do you have the delta from Goff up to Stafford, but you also have Sean McVay being freed to install the offense he wants to install. He was obviously frustrated by Jared Goff and put the training wheels back on the offense in 2019, kept them on for all of 2020. And he was running an offense that was limited by the quarterback. Now he's going to be running an offense that won't be limited by the quarterback. We could even talk about San Francisco from that point of view. What's fun? Which offenses are fun to project? They're the offenses with growth potential. Arizona qualifies. Cleveland, and the thing is, and look, with Cleveland, it's not outlandish to project them as maybe the most efficient offense in the league on a yards per play basis, et cetera, because again, this offense was already clicking without Odell Beckham last year, and now they have year 2, Austin Hooper saying like we didn't get to do a lot of the stuff that Kevin Stefanski wanted to do, and it may well be, by the way, Kyle, that Kevin Stefanski is the smartest coach in the NFL. Like a year or 2, we may look back and say we should have known that. We talk about Sean McVay, we all gush about Sean McVay, we all gush about Kyle Shanahan, and all along it should have been Kevin Stefanski that we were putting up on that pedestal to say that whatever you want players associated with this coach is going to maximize the quality of these players. So I think that Cleveland becomes a fun one because what you do is you stick your neck out a little bit and say, yeah, I think that this team is going to set the bar higher than they ever have before. Carolina's interesting depending on what you think of Sam Darnold and the Adam Gase effect, right? Dallas can be fun if you just say, hey, what is a whole season with Dak Prescott and a healthy-ish offensive line? Can we just keep those 2 tackles healthy? What does that look like? Do we even understand? Are we underestimating that? Indianapolis, from a similar point of view to Carolina, how much do you buy into Frank Reich fixing Wentz? How much of what was wrong with Wentz was situational with the whole offense collapsing around him, and how much of it maybe was just flaws in Wentz that even if he's back with Frank Reich, it's not going to matter. You mentioned Kansas City in the offensive line. The Chargers are interesting because what is your hypothesis here? Is it just that Justin Herbert was like a force of nature and it didn't even matter what Anthony Lynn was going to do? It's almost like it's almost like Anthony Lynn was playing the video game, Kyle, and someone unplugged his controller and no one told him, and he's still sitting there on the sidelines, like pressing buttons, thinking that he's making, and it's really just Justin Herbert with the controller. Now, some might say Joe Lombardi is a negative, right? Matthew Stafford would say that. Joe Lombardi's offense was not that visionary, but both with Joe Lombardi and Dan Campbell up in Detroit, we also have this idea of what is it? Does it matter that they spent like 5 years under Sean Payton? This time, when they get a chance, do they show that they've learned something from Sean Payton? So that one could be interesting if you project that. Of course, there's Miami, which I think hinges on Tua. I just think it just hinges on what you think of Tua and whether last year was an aberration or not. But if Tua, last year indeed was an aberration, no offseason, came off of an injury, etc. Chan Gailey, have you noticed, by the way, that Brian Flores likes to just flush his coordinators or position coaches when he doesn't like them anymore? It's just unceremonious. It's like, pack up your stuff. And that was what it was with Chan Gailey. So is that a sign maybe that Chan Gailey was part of the reason that Tua was being held back? The Jets are fun. The Jets are fun because, again, how much Adam Gase is like having like carrying like a refrigerator on your back. You know what I mean? Like, how much more can they at least just like walk or run without having Adam Gase weighing everything down? We've seen this with individual players like Ryan Tannehill, Devontae Parker, and so on. So that is a fun one. And
let's run with the Jets for a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's one of the biggest question marks for me, because we just think about the culture change going on in New York. And that's this. I feel like the Jets are a team where you have to have a stance on no matter what kind of league you play, because you have to listen to the Elijah Moore drum beats right now. I think just because it seems like everyone. I think I remember you when Mahomes kind of took over that one summer, and it was the cat that swallowed the canary or whatever. It kind of feels like they got away with robbery with Elijah Moore in the second round. So everything's really positive about him. It sounds like Zach Wilson. If it was going bad, we would have heard about it by now.
Right.
It sounds like the offense is getting easily installed. It sounds like Michael Carter's having fun. The Jets are going to be a better team. So, like, because you were kind of talking about teams that should be better, the Jets might be one of the most improved teams this year. Whether that's 8-9 wins, whatever. There's just no expectations. It's a fun young team. They're going to try as much as they can and see what sticks at the wall. But this is a difficult team to project. Like, I don't know where have you been left off with it, but I'm interested in Zach Wilson in Superflex leagues. I think Michael Carter's a potential top 30, PPR RB flex, guy there. And then as far as the receivers, we're out on Chris Herndon, the tight end. Tyler Kroft blocking, Yeboah. We'll see. But it's Elijah Moore and Zach Wilson that has me intrigued with the Jets right now.
Yeah, Zach Wilson, from all early indications, doesn't look overwhelmed. Doesn't look like his head is swimming. Doesn't look like the game is too big for him. It's early, super early. But look, we can always look back. Kyle, it's like the college career was the prologue, and now we're in the first chapter of the pro career. And maybe OTAs and minicamp are just the first few sentences of the first paragraph. But still, you can read a story, read the opening paragraph, and get a feeling about where the story is going to go. And sometimes you're wrong, and sometimes you're right, but it's still part of the story. And at least at this point, there's no indications that Zach Wilson isn't going to be ready for everything that's thrown at him. Knock on wood, may he stay healthy. And I think that's one of the things from a fantasy standpoint that we maybe need to slow our roll a little bit on Wilson. Not that I see people doing this, is I would hope that anytime he's outside of the pocket, he's going to be heavily coached to get down. You might be used to, as Zach Wilson, being able to make these plays happen like Johnny Manziel or something like that. But much like Manziel, he's not Josh Allen. He's not even Trey Lance, who's very solidly built. He's, I think, really going to subject himself to a big injury risk if he lays himself out there to make plays outside of the pocket. But the exciting thing here about the Jets, number one, you've got Mike LaFleur. So you have the Kyle Shanahan tree here in the offensive coaching that, unlike Adam Gase, everything we've learned about Adam Gase, it's not a story anymore, Kyle, but we hear things drip and leak out about, Adam Gase was not interested in meeting players halfway on anything. Adam Gase was not interested in creating any kind of scheme to fit what his players can do. He just had what Adam Gase does, and either you fit in that or you didn't. Like Sam Darnold, So that's exciting that Mike, we have a rational coaching staff that's going to look at what they have here. The other thing I think we need to monitor here is we know they have a good left-handed offense. I'm borrowing that from my man Matt Patanti, who was with us on draft night when they moved up to take Elijah Vera Tucker. So now you have Mekhi Becton and Vera Tucker on the left side of that line. So you have a left-handed offense. So at least you have some things that work. They've been sniffing around Morgan Moses, who's still a solid right tackle. So now if you bring in Morgan Moses, that's going to make the job of the right guard, whoever it is, easier. And you also have the center, who at least has Vera Tucker on one side. So you start to see some analysis I've been seeing, whether it's secondaries or offensive lines, Kyle, is you're as good as your weakest link. Mm-hmm. So this helps the Jets in that kind of analysis. So now if the offense is even less predictable and more successful because they have quality tackles on both sides, that opens up possibilities. But you mentioned Elijah Moore. You mentioned Michael Carter. Carter's solid. I mean, he reminds me a lot of Duke Johnson. Mm-hmm. And what were we doing with Duke Johnson, or what was I doing? I don't want to put this on everybody else. Is every time he would go to a new team, would say, or a new coach, they're going to know how to use him. They're going to use him to the fullest of his abilities. The good news is that Michael Carter doesn't really have any competition. Tevin Coleman, the coaches know him from San Francisco, but come on. So I'm fine with an aspirational pick of Carter. He looks like he's going to at least lead this backfield in touches, lead this backfield in fantasy points. Now, by how much will it be fantasy relevant? I'm not sure, but it'll be fun to find out with him on your roster. And then there's Elijah Moore, and you just cannot ignore what we are learning about Moore, which is, Kyle, you had Connor Hughes from The Athletic saying, mm-hmm. Anytime someone starts out a sentence with, I don't say this lightly, yep. Listen, right? And he was the best player on the field. Elijah Moore was the best player on the field. So ignore it at your own risk. He's the one Jets receiver you want to take. And if you want to take somebody else, I think it's Keelan Cole at this point, because he fits. This offense is going to be set up more for quick run after catch opportunities, route runners. That's not Denzel Mims. Corey Davis, I think, is very much a player to avoid this year because he's not going to be the number 2 receiver. He's going to be the number 1 receiver. What does that mean just at a starting point, Kyle? And again, you're thinking about these things while you're projecting offenses, right? 6 times a year, Corey Davis is probably going to get Stephon Gilmore or Tre'Davious White or Xavier Howard, as long as the Dolphins and Howard get this contract thing worked out. That's over a third of the schedule he's going to face among the best corners in the game. So I think that he's kind of like, remember Sammy Watkins with the Rams, where he was basically a decoy, mm-hmm. or this idea of chess, right? Like trading pieces. Like if you can trade Corey Davis for whatever impact Gilmore, Howard, White is going to have on the game, that's a good trade.
They can have it, yeah.
That's a good trade. And then Elijah Moore or Keelan Cole or whoever is going to be the players making hay there. So yes, this is going to be fun to watch. And one of the other things I do a lot at this time of year, Kyle, is look at the schedule.
That was my next question, because you started talking about Corey Davis and things like that. So I wanted to know, like, I've heard you talk about the 49ers schedule a lot, how it really opens up for Trey Lance and really the entire 49ers offense. But Trey Lance, Trey Sermon towards that second half of this, mm-hmm. that it should be really, really nice. But is there any team that has like a really particularly good start to this season, whether that's the first 3-4 weeks? Is there a run in the middle of this season? Or what stuck out to you with the schedule so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we look at schedule analysis, we're looking for teams that can get off to hot starts. So there's 2 different things we want to look at here. One of the things we've already talked about is when you're projecting there to be changes mid-season at quarterback, and then that cascades down to values of players in the offense. Adam Harstad, who's one of my favorite people, one of the smartest people I've ever met, talks about how the playoff weeks in fantasy football are more important. Right? The playoff weeks in fantasy football are more important than the regular season weeks. So when we're projecting change mid-season, the important thing to remember is that means you're projecting it to be the second way in the most important weeks in the fantasy football season. So draft and make moves accordingly. But the other side of it is the hot start. Your fantasy team gets off to a 4-0 start, 4-1 start. That gives you a lot of flexibility in management. And the early schedule, we can make some, educated guesses based on how some of these offenses looked last year and how some of these defenses looked last year. So, for instance, Tampa Bay starts out with Dallas and Atlanta. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, that's just going to be like an extended practice for that offense. You mentioned the Jets. The Jets do get to start with Carolina, but then they get New England and Denver. And then they get Tennessee and Atlanta. So, we'll see how Zach Wilson looks after he goes into the meat grinder of New England, especially that Denver offense. I really like the start in terms of possibility of shootouts. And my friend Eric Stoner brought this up of Kansas City's schedule, Cleveland, Baltimore, the Chargers, right off the bat, some massive AFC power contests. I think those could potentially be high scoring games. Again, looking at Cleveland gets that Kansas City game. They get Houston week 2, Chicago, Minnesota, Chargers, Arizona. We're looking. That looks like a runway for them to show the rest of the league just how far they've come. I'll tell you one that is maybe a little bit scarier is even though the Steelers do get Vegas and Cincinnati in week 2 and 3, they get Buffalo week 1. They get Green Bay week 4. They get Denver week 5. I mean, if we were going to say, because it's David DeCastro news and things like that, what are the scariest pass rushes right now in the league? Green Bay and Denver are up there. Buffalo maybe doesn't have a lot of pass rush stars, but they're a very disciplined defense, good coverage, good assignment football. They completely frustrated the Steelers last year. So I wonder if 5 weeks into the season, we're looking at the Steelers having a few miserable games, just games that make it look like even getting a first down is a Herculean task for this offense. I think that we'll be able to fix this stuff a little bit better once we get into training camp and we hear about momentum and we hear about how some of these new installs are going and new players on new teams. But I think it's absolutely the time to be looking at that and at least thinking of the range of possibilities.
And I like to look at it as when I'm drafting too, I don't strictly draft based on schedule, but it's nice to have a player or two where you're like, I like his schedule to start the year. It's nice to have a guy that, when like the David Montgomery stuff last year, if you were looking ahead, you could see Chicago had a really nice, favorable running game schedule down the stretch. I think that's a huge part of just hitting. I think of fantasy football as chutes and ladders.
Yeah.
And you just don't want to, fall down. So you're looking for any kind of little escalator that you can take for free. And then I did have one more, I guess, question. When I do my projections, I do them team by team. I'm doing the Cardinals first, and I kind of just keep moving down the list. Sometimes I do it by division. And then I don't look at what the output was until the very ending. So I'm just interested in like any revelations that like, oh man, I thought this, this really was surprising. Like, what did you learn from doing the projections?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because what projections do is they force you to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have, you would get into situations where you would say, okay, I'm going to project this quarterback to throw this many times. And then you project each wide receiver for about the number of receptions, yards, et cetera, that you expect. And then you either come up really short and you say, okay, well, somebody's going to outperform my expectations here. Or you say, well, maybe I'm overestimating how much the passing game is going to grow and I'm just going to bring the quarterback down. But if you project each offense in its components, and then you see how they match up, you see where your assumptions might be off, right? So, for instance, I'll give you one right off the bat. Like, how is anybody other than DeAndre Hopkins going to be relevant in the passing game in Arizona? How can you, whatever's left over after DeAndre Hopkins gets his targets, it's going to be chopped up between Chase Edmonds, James Conner to a lesser extent. You've swapped out AJ Green for Fitzgerald. If anything, that's an upgrade. He's at least going to get Fitzgerald's targets from last year. You still have Christian Kirk. You've added Rondale Moore. And you still even have the benefit of the tight end getting almost no targets. But you find very quickly that to expect there to be anybody outside of injury to be relevant in this pass offense other than DeAndre Hopkins on a consistent basis, it's a hard ask, right? Another one is Kyle Pitts. And Kyle, I'm happy to be carrying the flag for be overly optimistic based on expectations on Kyle Pitts because, again, vacuum, Julio Jones is gone. Okay, project this offense, even if you want to project it with some modest drops in passing efficiency, some modest drops in passing volume. We'll see what Arthur Smith's going to do. You get into these binds, right? Either you're going to say this team is like Mike Davis is actually going to establish the run, or Quadri Olson is going to establish the run, and they're actually going to have a balanced offense, or you're going to project Calvin Ridley to be like the number one far and away fantasy wide receiver, or you're going to project Russell Gage to catch like 90 balls or something outlandish, or you're just going to accept, I'm going to say, that Kyle Pitts is going to be a monster right away. Mm-hmm. Either way, you're going to have, unless you project the Falcons to be one of the worst offenses in the league, and they're not going to be one of the worst offenses in the league. And depending on whether Arthur Smith is actually some kind of genius or not, they might still be a top half of the league offense. You have to put that somewhere. You can put it on Davis. You can put it on Pitts. You can put it on Gage. You can say that Calvin Ridley is going to be the number one fantasy wide receiver at the end of the year, but you got to put it somewhere. You have to have somebody filling that vacuum. So all of these things keep you honest. And that's where I think for someone that's a fantasy expert, air quotes, that's why doing season-long projections is a valuable exercise, because you find out where your beliefs just lead. It's like an Escher picture, right? Where you're like, well, I can't get out of this little staircase if I keep it projected like this. If I want it to actually be linear and reflect reality, I have to change something.
And sometimes, like in a case like Kyle Pitts, because you're either in it or you're not for it. I was doing my tight end study share last night on yard share, and only 2 tight ends had obviously more than 1,000 yards last season. Only 2 tight ends also had more than 800 yards, which there's this huge gap. You know, you got Kelsey and Waller; those guys are the kings. They stay up there. But after that, if you can find a tight end that's going to hit 700 yards, like that's kind of the threshold right now. Mm-hmm. That 700-800 yard range. And if you sit and do the Kyle Pitts and the Atlanta Falcons projections, and you remove Julio, and you got all of this, there's too much volume. There's pie is too big, where something has to. You either, again, you're projecting Ridley for 1,600 yards or something, but there is too much opportunity on Kyle Pitts' plate to ignore right now. And I think the 4th and 5th round opportunity to get a guy that's going to probably be somewhere in that 700-800 yard range on a floor. That's
right. That's his floor.
You're buying a floor here of a tight end 3 or 4. And then again, the thing that kind of holds all tides is you look at a guy like Robert Tonyan last year, insane efficiency and touchdowns. If Pitts is kind of the thing in the red zone for Matt Ryan's always kind of been missing something in the red zone, right? Mm-hmm. No Julio never was a red zone guy, but if Kyle Pitts walks into 700-800 yards as a floor, 6 to 8 touchdowns, that was worth the pick. So it's kind of taking that stance and sitting and doing the projections. Sometimes I try to do with certain players, I will project a floor first, and then I'll let it sit and kind of just think about it for a little bit, and then you kind of think about the ceiling, and then you always kind of wind up somewhere in between. But with Pitts, it's fully there, and just it's Atlanta's offense.
It's going to be beautiful
to watch this year. I think
it's going to be beautiful. And to go on to the other side, because I love optimism. I wrote an article one year about how optimism can help you win fantasy leagues, mm-hmm. Or it can certainly help you have a better time playing fantasy football. At least, it's funny. I'm an optimist to the point where I'm naive. Mm-hmm. I'm naive. Can you tell that I'm naive, Kyle? I'm gonna turn this into an On the Couch episode. I'm gonna psychoanalyze myself here.
The last 16 or 15 minutes, so it's anything goes right now.
Right. I'm naive. And I generally assume the best in people. And it leaves me open to be blindsided by people who don't have the best intentions in them. But one of my good friends, Mark Folletti, who I worked with for a long time, we did Draft Guys TV, and I had a great time. The years that I got to work with Mark were wonderful. I cherish them. I treasure them. He told me, but you still win by being an optimist, even whenever you get blindsided and taken advantage of, because the whole time leading up to that, you're still seeing the potential for good in the world. You're still seeing the potential for good in people. And even when that bad thing happens, that doesn't get taken away. So if you're an optimist playing fantasy football, like especially during June, July, and August, before we've even started to play the games, it helps you enjoy the game and the whole endeavor more. So be an optimist. So I'm always going to try to zero in on where I'm really optimistic. But there's also places where doing projections, team projections, league-wide projections for the season are going to make you a pessimist. Mm-hmm. unless you're going to do something that is, and it's okay. I mean, look, I encourage everybody out there to project where their beliefs are, changes in offenses that would make people say, you're crazy. That can't happen. Because the things that decide fantasy leagues most years are the things that before the season people would have said, that can't happen. Josh Allen can't turn into one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Stephon Diggs cannot outproduce anything he ever did in Minnesota in his first year with Josh Allen in this run-first offense. So if you saw that coming, if you were parsing Brian Dable quotes, if you were reading the offseason tea leaves about what Josh Allen had been doing, no offseason didn't matter to him. You were a visionary. You were ahead of the curve, and you benefited from it, and it's really fun when those things happen. But there are certain times that you do a team-wide projection, and you just say, there's no way to make it all work. I'll give you some of those teams in the passing game. Baltimore. I mean, I don't care how much you like Rashad Bateman. You can even project healthy drops for Marquise Brown and even an incremental increase in passing volume and passing efficiency. But outside of Mark Andrews, we know Mark Andrews isn't going to go away. Outside of Mark Andrews, maybe, and remember, J.K. Dobbins is supposed to get more targets this year too. So maybe one wide receiver will be consistently relevant. Maybe. And it's most likely Marquise Brown. I don't care how much you like Rashad Bateman. But chances are it's nobody. Denver.
Maybe Watkins might even come up the way.
Right. Devin Duvernay is going to get targets. You know what I mean? Nick Boyle's back. He's going to get his sprinkling of targets, and he's going to help the running game. There's just no way to project the Baltimore pass offense with more than one pass catcher other than Mark Andrews being relevant. And it can change from week to week. Denver, unless you're projecting Aaron Rodgers to be the starting quarterback, I don't see how you can project more than 1.5. I'm counting Noah Fant as a half because we know he's going to be relevant because of the things you were pointing about tight end position. Will he be a difference maker, truly a difference maker? I don't know. But he will at least be an every week starter in fantasy football. But again, if it's Drew Lock, it's probably Cortland Sutton. If it's Teddy Bridgewater, I think it's going to be Bridgewater. By the way, speaking of early season starts, you mentioned that. Javonte Williams, because Denver starts with the Giants, the Jags, and the Jets. That sounds like a 3-0 start to me. If it's not a 3-0 start, Vic Fangio's got some splaining to do, and maybe that's Javonte Williams' takeoff because those are positive game scripts for him. But I don't see how more than one receiver is. If it's Bridgewater, it's Judy. I think if it's Locke, it is going to be Sutton. But, you still have KJ Hamler getting targets. You still have Tim Patrick getting. Even the Rams might be tough. This team, I think, is going to use all 5 of their receivers this year. Miami. So Miami right now from an ADP standpoint, and it's fun to look at projections and look at ADP, right? Because in some ways, ADP is a hive mind projection for an offense. Right? I've talked about this before on my show recently. If you look at teams that have all 3 wide receivers in the front half, top 120 of fantasy drafts, some of them are obvious, right? Dallas, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay, Pittsburgh. And it makes sense because we project those offenses to have big passing numbers. We know the quality of those players. They all have track records, right? Miami? Wait a second. Miami has 3 wide receivers? We don't know about Tua. We don't know about this offense. We don't know if Will Fuller can stay healthy. We don't know Jalen Waddle. We don't know what Devontae Parker can do with Tua. There wasn't much chemistry there. And we're projecting 3 of their, and Mike Gesicki. Mike Gesicki is right around 120. How could the Miami, unless you're projecting Tua Tagovailoa to have a quantum leap forward this year, how can it possibly satisfy that? I don't see that. Even Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Now, you can tell me a story that the offensive line, the same things that caused collapse for Carson Wentz, held back Jalen Hurts. And with the offensive line reconstituted, and we'll see what Nick Sirianni does, maybe also there's just bad vibes, right? Like just bad vibes coming out of Philadelphia all along. And maybe just, even though Doug Peterson should not have been shown the door the way he was, just sweeping that aside and moving forward might have been the best thing for the organization. But also, it might just be that, hey, there's a reason Jalen Hurts fell to the late second round. Mm-hmm. He's limited as a passer. So how can he support more than one fantasy relevant receiver every week? Maybe it's Devontae Smith. Maybe it's Dallas Goedert. We still have the question of Zach Ertz. So those are offenses that I think it's difficult to be bullish on for the number of fantasy targets it can support week in, week out. And then on the flip side of that is Detroit. right? Detroit is the classic, like somebody has to catch the ball, right? And especially if you're projecting them as a losing team, as much as Anthony Lynn wants to run the ball, somebody other than TJ Hawkinson could be relevant. So you massage the numbers and you see how that works out. But all these exercises are fun because it's just as important whenever you see that you're too pessimistic as it is when you see you're too optimistic. And then we tear it all up like 2 weeks into the season anyway.
Right. Well, my goal is I want to be like, what's crazy is you look at what you drafted and then how your season ended, and it's just like it's maybe 50% of what you drafted is still
right.
There. But the cool part about projections is looking at a team from a whole and figuring out, oh, Samaje Perine back up. You're looking for where the ball might go after the initial people might have been hurt, or you're just looking for other avenues that could move the ball. So by doing the projections, you're getting exposed to these names and getting open to ideas.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit quicker than people can see it coming. So that's a good part about the projections. But I don't know. We got maybe 10 minutes or so left.
Yeah.
I just ask you some fun questions, and
let's have fun.
Anything we can do. But if Sigmund Bloom was commissioner, what league are you creating, and what are the main rules?
Commissioner of a fantasy football league?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier, like one of my favorite leagues to play in. Like,
yep.
I know this isn't going to be for everybody, but I love, and I don't have any right now because they're so time consuming. I love the leagues. There was a couple of dudes. I'm going to forget one of their names, so I don't want to mention it. It was Chris. I can't remember. I'm so sorry, man. They started these leagues called Paragon Leagues, like in the last 10 years. And what it is, it's 16 teams. I think there's even 32 team versions of them. It's cap contract.
Ooh.
And it's full IDP. And when you do IDP fantasy football, you have to make the scoring for defensive players. Like your top linebacker should be about as valuable as your top wide receivers.
Mm-hmm.
Your top defensive end should be about worth as much as your top tight end, et cetera, so that it actually matters. So this makes drafting a lot more fun because there's no positions that are weighted too heavily. I probably would even include Superflex at this point. And then you have the cap contract, because the fun thing about the cap contract is you lock in. It's great in a dynasty league when you draft somebody in your rookie draft and they hit, or you trade for them before they hit and you reap the rewards of that. But the cap contract aspect adds the layer of you benefit even more whenever you realize ahead of the curve that somebody, James Robinson, you got him locked into like a $1 contract or something like that. But then you also, it stings whenever you're like the Rams and you sign Todd Gurley to that 5-year, 20% of your cap contract, and by year 3, and they have a penalty. Like you can get out, just like the league, right? You can get out of a bad contract, but it accelerates money so that the next year you've got a lot of dead cap and you have to live with the effects of the decision you made. So I think, what does it come back to, Kyle? Why do we play fantasy football? Because we thought we could be better GMs than the GMs. So let's make a league where you actually have to make GM-like decisions and have to have GM-like punishments when you're wrong.
So when I first started playing fantasy football, it was a Yahoo salary cap league through like my dad's work. And what was cool about it was that week 1, say I bought Marvin Harrison back in the day for $200 or X amount of dollars, whatever it was, and he blows up that first week, and the next week everyone wants him and he doubled in value, I still get to keep him at that price. So it's essentially kind of just taking the week 1 values and locking those in. You can change those guys out as you go. But I think that with the salary cap and just the structuring of things, that does sound like a pretty fun league. I think I got to get into a guillotine league this year.
Yes.
I'm going to look into that, and then I'm going to look into these Paragon leagues too. But for me, everything I won't play in a league. I need Superflex. Superflex has changed the way that I like to play. It changes the draft. It's so much fun. But do you do a lot of auction drafts, Sig?
I wish I had time to do that. Auction is great. Auction is very superior to your classic snake draft because you can build a team however you want. I like to think of it as like in a snake draft, it's like you get dealt out a certain number of bills in your wallet.
Yeah.
And when you use that bill, it's like the vending machine where you put and does not dispense change. You don't get change, right? Like if you've spent your 3rd round pick on a 4th round player, you don't get a round's worth of currency back. But in auction, you can do that. In auction, you can break up your bankroll however you want. studs and duds and so on, different strategies. And you're also not constricted by your draft position. I mean, depending on your draft position, you have no chance to get Derrick Henry. You have no chance to get Christian McCaffrey. You have no chance to get Dalvin Cook. Or you certainly can't do something like, I want to get Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey. You can't do that. In an auction, you can try out a much larger range of strategies. And also, with all the software out there, you can do slow auctions, which is nice. But if you do an in-person auction or a fast auction, you have to have all very dedicated players.
Go ahead. This leads me to my next fun question.
Yeah.
If you were, say, this is the league that you just created, you're doing a live auction, who would you want? Any person, past, present, any person, celebrity that you can think of, who would you want as your auctioneer to just run the show?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wow. No, that's a really good one.
I have my answer if you want to think about it for a little.
Go ahead. Tell me your answer, because there's so many things rushing to my head at once. Go ahead.
I'm just thinking of I want my draft to be really fun, and I've thought about a lot of different comedians and such, but Will Ferrell is probably the one that I think could just nail it and just have everybody engaged and fully whatever. He can pick whatever character he wants to do, but I think Will Ferrell would keep everything light and fun and keep it moving.
Yeah, and we've always paid homage to Will on our show with Stay Classy, Anchorman. I thought Anchorman was a perfect homage to what we're doing, because we're just pretending. We're all just pretending anyway, right? You know who popped into my head? Our president, Marshawn Lynch.
Ah, okay.
Now, if Marshawn Lynch was running our fantasy draft, chances are we would never even finish it, right? But we would have a lot more fun than whatever we were going to do, like our fantasy league.
Right.
Marshawn Lynch is truly a national treasure and a really fun human being. And I think that I don't know that it would be great for having a good fantasy league, but I think it would be great for everyone having an experience that they'd always remember.
Right, you're just hanging out with Marshawn. And then, so we're going to play a little bit of over-under here.
Yeah.
The DraftKings Sportsbook just released their season-long totals here, so I think maybe a couple of these are a little fun to look at. I got one for you. They released a Tim Tebow one, man.
Okay.
Tim Tebow over-under 12.5 yards on the season.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go over, right? I mean, this is a referendum on, is Urban Meyer going to just do what Urban Meyer does? And I haven't seen anything to the contrary yet.
Some passing stats. I don't know if you have your numbers in front of you to see what you projected, but
okay.
What do you think for Matthew Stafford, over 4,700?
Let me look at this. I'm gonna have to wait for it to load here. So you're right. I can look at what my projections are at this moment and tell us. Sorry, folks, I'm going to say this is probably going to be under, though, but we'll see. 4,700 on the dot?
47.5.
Okay. Drum roll. 47.85.
Nice.
That's good. That validates my projection. So we're in the ballpark, a little bit over.
And I have him under. I have him at 46.62 or 65. Okay. Another quarterback. They only have one quarterback listed over 5,000. Can you guess who that is?
Dak?
It's Mahomes.
Oh.
Mahomes at 5,050.5.
I have him, actually, you know what? I have him at almost a mile, 52.71. Well, I guess that's feet, but I like the number. Since we're on it, I'll look at what I have I have Prescott, actually lower. I have Prescott at 50.96. But remember, it's 17 games. So 5,000 doesn't mean the same that it has met in past years.
I'm not seeing that. I don't see a Dak Prescott line, which is unfortunate. They do have a Ryan Tannehill one, which I think we didn't get to talk about the Titans offense, but as far as predictability with projections, I loved projecting the Titans offense.
Yeah.
You know where the ball is going to go.
Yes.
Ryan Tannehill at 4,050.5.
Wow. I have him at 41.25. I think that if there was here's a good Ryan Tannehill prop for you. He may lead the league in yards per completion and attempt.
Yep.
I think that's, if the Browns aren't the most efficient offense in the league, I think the Titans will be right there with them.
I have him second in yards per attempt, only behind, who is it? Behind Kirk Cousins. What?
Well, hey, that's actually, Kirk Cousins can back that up, yeah.
And I just want to shout out the Paul Charchian show you did the other day. I think you need to somehow throw in the names Justin Jefferson and Antonio Gibson into the show. If you're gonna draft second-year players, I need to make more content this year or the rest of the summer on second-year players. I think that group of players is going to make or break your seasons this year. There's just so many in that second round. It's so juicy.
I think you can just do a draft strategy, because everyone loves these draft strategies. Just draft all second-year players. How can we put together a team based on ADP that's all second-year players? I think we can do it.
Jonathan Taylor round.
Right. Johnson Jefferson.
Gibson or something.
Gibson maybe in the third.
who's in the third? Gibson in the third, fourth.
Adam Troutman's your tight end.
Lamb, something.
CeeDee Lamb in the fourth, right?
Working on it. But let's see here. There's another over under here that I thought maybe we look at the rushing totals. They got Derrick Henry pretty high, but 1,550.5.
Oh, that's an easy over. Come on.
We're just going to give him at least 100 yards a game there.
I have him in 1978. Why in the world? So go, folks. This is like go put your retirement fund on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless Derrick Henry gets hurt or breaks down, why would you project his totals to fall in any way? I mean, I have him falling like slightly over. He was over 2,000 last year.
In the 17s, yeah.
We don't understand yet what offense with Julio Jones and A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry is going to look like. It can ask questions of defenses that they cannot answer. Whenever the Julio Jones trade happened, there was some good analysis. I can't remember who put it out there. It was basically like, here's how this goes. If they're going to run, if they're going to do heavy box to limit Henry, then Brown and Julio are going to get single coverage. If you're going to do like safety coverage shaded to one side or the other, then the other receiver is going to feast. And if you go with a light box and protect against Julio and Brown, then Henry's going to feast. It's basically just like, I mean, good offensive coordinators know how to design plays and train their players to execute so that it's like option routes, right? Like all you have to do is watch the choice that the defense makes and process that and make a valid choice based on that. And we can't be stopped. And when you have those three players, they can't be stopped. So yeah, put all your money on Derrick Henry going over 1,500 whatever yards.
And we're over our hour. Are we okay?
Oh yeah.
A little bit yet?
What's that?
We're over our hour. Are we okay to keep running for just a little bit here?
Yeah, tee up a couple more. Let's see what we can hit.
Antonio Gibson. He's set at 1,000.5 yards.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
I mean, again, like this is one of those things. I think I have him at 1192. By the way, this is one of those things where fantasy players are going to be set up with these props, and this year was the first year people were able to do it with the draft too. A lot of people made a lot of money on draft props because we do a really good job being thorough as analysts and considering every piece of information that we have. And I think these lines, Kyle, are set to capture more casual gamblers who aren't necessarily coming from the rigorous, intense process that we do in our fantasy analysis. And sure enough, and to bring these up at the end of the show is an excellent idea because this follows directly from doing projections and it follows directly from the work that we do. And it's a way to, if you really go ahead.
Right? Like we're kind of just, I like looking, especially during the regular season too, like when all the odds come out and all the game lines come out. This is just a way for us to double check our numbers and see, are we on par with what Vegas is thinking? Right. Should we be higher? Should we be lower? Oh no, like we have too many touchdowns for this player. It's just a way of checks and balancing, I guess, our projections out.
And we shouldn't be surprised whenever our projections are way off of the Vegas projection, because the Vegas projection is not a projection. It is not Vegas saying we think this is the most likely number. What did we define our projections as? The mean or median number for the range of outcomes for a player's production in a specific category this year. Vegas is not trying to do that. When Vegas says Derrick Henry 1,500 whatever yards, they're not trying to say we think that's what Derrick Henry's going to get. They're saying we think we can get 50-50 action on either side of that number. So they're more gauging psychology of the gambling public than they are making a prediction, an analytical prediction about a player's performance. And you see that by the way lines move. You see that by the way, I'm sure some props will move. And that's a whole other interesting way to study this, is where Vegas immediately corrects because they were wrong. 75% of the money is coming in on one side and they need to change it or they need to take it off the board. And then you can even go deeper, people like Joe Holka, people doing this, where you can say, this is where the majority of bets are. Mm-hmm. This is where the public is. But then on the other hand, this is where the majority of money is. Mm-hmm. The sharps, so you may see 70% of the bets are under for Derrick Henry, but 70% of the money is over because the sharps, the people like professional gamblers, that's a whole other topic. They're hitting it hard. So it just adds more information. Some of it is based on psychology, some of it is based on analysis, and it's important for us to know the difference.
And one of the last names I just want to throw up because we talked about the Chiefs.
Hmm.
They have Clyde Edwards-Helaire set at 850 and a half rushing yards. That
Wow.
seems a little low to me. I think the Chiefs and Clyde are going to be moving pretty nicely this season.
Yeah, that's basically a disappointing season. That's
Right.
projecting that's a disappointing number for
Right.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So unless you are fading him, that seems easy too. So yeah, let's get those. Forget about the 401ks.
Right.
Put them all into
CEH.
futures.
We'll put him in the CEH. Anything else that you want to get off your mind today?
Oh man.
Just open floor to end the show. I'm so glad we were able to do today. This is a lot of fun.
I just I'll say this again. I said it on my show this week. I'm about to go to California for 2 weeks to the beach. The NFL basically collectively takes the next couple of weeks off after mini camps are up. We're all going to be swimming in football in the ocean of football for the rest of this year once training camps start. So it's a good time to just flush everything out of your mind, come to some peace, enjoy this summer, and do the things that are good self-care for you, whatever they are. And I know for me, Kyle, that's hanging out with people like you, doing shows together. Any time I get to see you and your always very positive presence in our chat room, everybody in our community, we continue to create a very positive community, an uplifting community. And it's just every year I say the same thing, man. It feels like I'm getting away with something, that this can be my occupation.
Right.
And also that everybody is so kind in our circle. And it's almost like everybody's indulging all of us that we get to do this. So I appreciate the opportunity. I look forward to our interactions and interactions with your audience. Love what the fellowship is doing. I think that y'all have been very dedicated to, well, kind of like football guys, right? Like just a set of values. Like everything that we do out in this space is going to reflect our values as a human being, how we interact with one another, what influence we want to have, what effect we want to have on each other. And I'm glad that it's brought us all together.
And I'm just so thankful you took the time out to hang out today. I know we're going on vacation. It's kind of that lull in the season. It's technically my favorite time of the year, just being around 4th of July. I think you have a birthday coming up too.
Yes, Cancerians.
You're on the 5th?
6th, right in the middle.
Okay,
like
I'm on the 8th. So like,
yeah,
we're at that point of the season where we've already kind of done all the work for the football season, right? And then now we're going to be moving our abacus and just clicks and knocks and things along the way through the rest of July. So the work is done. Check out Sigmund Bloom's work at footballguys.com. So many other Matt Waldman, read all of Matt Waldman's stuff. And your guys' your roundtable stuff lately. That's what I've been enjoying reading. When you have, most overvalued tight end or whatever, you guys got like 20 different answers. Just getting different opinions and different ideas out there. I think that's one of my favorite articles. So tons of work at footballguys.com. You can follow Sigmund Bloom on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. You guys know where to find all my stuff. I think that's going to do it for today, though. Thank you guys so much for your time. Have a good rest of your weekend. Adios. Peace.